At a certain point, I think we need to admit that at best, we are all casting about with dim flashlights in an infinite darkness, trying to conclude that whatever is illuminated in our cones of light is all that is. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today, I'm excited to talk about a publication that I have been looking forward to for months. I think I pre ordered this back in January of this year when it was first brought to my attention that none other than Calvin and Hobbes creator Bill Watterson was breaking a 28-year silence and collaborating with artist John Kascht to bring us a fable for adults. It is called The Mysteries. It comes to us in a beautiful hardcover cloth-bound edition with nice glossy pages to highlight this incredible artwork. But first, I just want to take a few moments to talk about what an inspiration Calvin and Hobbes and its creator, Bill Watterson, has been for me. When I was very young, I think third or fourth grade, I encountered my first Calvin and Hobbes comic, and I was completely floored. I immediately related to Calvin, of course, because his imagination is just running rampant and he gets totally immersed in his fantasies and then is sort of abruptly shaken and brought back into reality. Although I wouldn't have known it then, I know it now, but there's a very Don Quixote feel to it, where Quixote is, of course, so obsessed with and immersed in his chivalric romances that it completely alters reality. Although the difference between Quixote and Calvin, of course, is that Calvin does constantly snap back into reality and kind of see the destruction he's caused, such as wrecking the family vehicle because he thought that he was fighting some Martian from outer space or something like that. Whereas Quixote never wakes up from his fantasies. He just keeps plowing. And plus, I encountered these words. I remember the very first word I encountered was transmogrified. And I just thought, this is amazing. Like, seeing that word, I didn't know exactly what it meant, though in a way I could infer it from context. But it felt like I had discovered something that no one else knew about. It was like I wanted to collect these exotic words and put them in my pocket, fold them up on strips of paper and keep them in my pocket. And I think that is when I first started to fall in love with language, with words. Years and years later, when I wanted to become a sort of artist in my own right, of course, a writer, not a cartoonist, but Bill Watterson's commencement speech at Kenyon College, I sort of became infatuated with Kenyon College, and I worked very hard to get something published there. And for a long time, I was trying to get an original short story published. And in 2021, it would so happen that I got a book review published in Kenyon Review. So that was a real achievement for me that had been going on since I was very young and first found out that that's where Bill Watterson went to college. Now, I would also go on to take inspiration for Watterson's notorious vehemence at keeping his intellectual property, his creation, pure. And in many ways, Watterson has done the unimaginable. If we think about this, he is a real enigma. Here is a guy who attended prestigious liberal arts Kenyon College and got a political science degree. Yet, at the same time, he was honing his artistic skills by doing such things as painting parts of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel on the ceiling of his dorm room. And he would lay in the top bunk on his back and, with paint dripping in his face, just like Michelangelo did in the Sistine Chapel. And then he would go on to produce one of the most iconic newspaper cartoon strips in world history for only 10 years, 1985 to 1995, roughly. And then he retired, all but vanished. Basically retired and decided that he had done all he could do with Calvin and Hobbes and with the medium of the cartoon strip. And to go any farther would be to compromise the value and the quality of his artistic creation. Pretty incredible and laudable and very respectable, I'd say. And then we haven't heard anything. He retired after the 10 years of work and just dedicated himself to pursuing art for its own sake and for his own joy. And it's not like he figured out a way to use consumers and marketing and commercialization to sort of fund his retirement. In fact, Watterson is notorious for being totally against merchandising, anything to do with Calvin and Hobbes. If you see a Calvin and Hobbes t-shirt or stuffed animal or those stickers on the backs of vehicles with Calvin peeing on the ground, none of those are licensed by Watterson himself. In fact, he has been quoted as saying that only thieves have made money off of Calvin and Hobbes. His stance is that this would absolutely cheapen the value of his creation. So he very much places a high value on the artistic process and artistic achievements, on the creative act, despite being massively pressured for decades to merchandise. And now we have the mysteries. So for those of us who left off in 1995, 28 years later now, we have something from Bill Watterson at last. It may be disappointing to some people that the book is so small, but I assure you that it's worth it. It's worth the purchase. It's worth owning. And the story that Watterson worked on is just as good as the amazing artwork. It tells a very familiar and prescient story that will resonate with all of us, tracing the ever-expanding limits of our human knowledge from the Dark Ages through the Renaissance, into the Enlightenment, through the Industrial Revolution, and even beyond our current environmental turmoil. But it has a twist that rescues it from mere convention. Take your time with it. Read it over and over, because this is a tale told so simply and subtly that it's like a whisper at bedtime. The artwork is incredible, and the copy on the book tells us that Watterson and Kascht worked together very closely and went beyond the limits of what they had ever done before and sort of discovered a new style. And the thing that I notice about it, it's this beautiful, striking, gloomy, I'd even say mysterious, black and white artwork. But it has that tilt shift design to it. A friend of mine who is a photographer bought this tilt shift lens where the lens could actually move around. And he was explaining some of these photos to me. It just looked to me like certain regions were really sharp and in focus and everything else was blurred out. He explained to me that there's a lot more going on than just that. And he explained about the focal plane and how something about the tilt of the lens was up or down or left or right, and then the shift part of it, blurred vertical lines parallel to something. He gave me this really incredible explanation that I didn't understand. Nonetheless, what's going on is that you'll see that the artwork, there are certain regions of it that are really sharp and in focus, and the other stuff is blurred out. And it makes for a very intense effect. I started to notice the commingling of the prose, and each page is laid out such that on the left, there's the prose, the story by Watterson, and then on the right is the artwork. And it's like the fine points of the admittedly spare prose is actually blurred out. What I mean is the finer points that are underneath the text that our eyes are passing over is blurred out, just like the unfocused regions of the artwork. And so the temptation is that our eyes are only drawn to the sharpness of the text on the page, and we are in danger of concluding that the abundant white space there has nothing to say. For example, I think it could be easy to just quickly rush through this book and come to the conclusion that, oh, it's just about science conquering art and religion. If you find yourself thinking that, read those final words, that final page, and take note of what it is that survives in the end. Reading through it a few times now, I noted that the tale is so dynamic and so nuanced that it can actually take on a multitude of readings. It can take on a naturalist reading, that is nature's indifference to human beings. It can be given a humanist reading. In other words, look at the magnificence of what we can do. It can be given a very much political reading, for note that even though climate disasters are starting to take place, the king of the land assures everyone that it's all fine, don't worry about it, just ignore it. It can be given a pro-artistic reading, that is, explanation destroys the power of mystery. But then it can also be given a pro-scientific reading. Anything can be explained given enough time and objective observation, and this is best. It can even be given a sort of quasi-religious reading. Explanation and progress have made the people's lives less fearful and more luxurious, but in the end, it has saved no one. But whether you take any of these readings or any of these sides, note that the people become bored and unimpressed with science's discoveries, and they laugh irreverently at the paintings of the old masters, or that is, artistic aspiration. Obviously, the whole point of scientific discovery and explanation is to dispel fear and to alleviate human suffering, which is of course laudable. But any of these slants that you could bring to the tale suffer from something that I think is trying to be pointed out in this work, and that is the error of reductionism, reducing something to one cause or one bent. And so at the end, on that last page, Watterson's simple lines, which harness the shop-worn simplicity of a classic fairy tale, put a thorn in the side of every one of these possible readings. It's actually very brilliant. I think that in the end, the story is very much about the human need for and the capacity to balance both mystery and explanation. It's a warning to approach mystery or the unknown without xenophobia or zealotry, but to also utilize discovery with discretion and consideration. Comparing the small space of the misty woods at the beginning of the story and then the cosmic vastness at the end of it, we see that the human beings, despite everything they've done and discovered and created in between, really in the end know relatively very little. At a certain point, I think we need to admit that at best, we are all casting about with dim flashlights in an infinite darkness, trying to conclude that whatever is illuminated in our cones of light is all that is. And just to throw this out there as one more morsel for thought, consider the page in which the people behold the mystery for the first time. And I want you to notice how eerily it seems like those people in the tale are looking directly at you, the reader. I think that Watterson and Kascht have done something remarkable here with the mysteries. The words are worthy of the art, and the art is worthy of the words. And I can't help but love that there's a sly moment on, I think, about the 6th frame of this tale, where we see storyteller and artist collaborating together. So in the end, I say bravo and thank you.